And now Hugh Laurie continues his reading of The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Dr. Watson has discovered that the escaped convict hiding out on the moor is none other than the brother-in-law of Sir Henry Baskerville's butler. As he and Sir Henry return from an abortive attempt to apprehend the criminal, they spot a tall figure silhouetted on a rocky crag. Once more, it seems, they are being watched.
Extract from the diary of Dr. Watson. October the 16th. A dull and foggy day with a drizzle of rain. The baronet is in a black reaction after the excitement of last night. I am conscious myself of a weight at my heart and a feeling of impending danger, which is the more terrible because I'm unable to define it. A long sequence of incidents have all pointed to some sinister influence. The death of Sir Charles, the repeated reports of a strange creature on the moor, the distant baying of a hound which I've heard with my own ears. It's incredible that it should be outside the ordinary laws of nature. A spectral hound which leaves material footmarks and fills the air with howling defies common sense. But quite apart from the hound, there was the man in the cab in London and the letter which warned Sir Henry against the moor. Was it the work of an enemy or a protecting friend? And where was the friend or enemy now? Had he remained in London, or could he be the stranger I saw last night upon the Tor? This morning we had a small scene after breakfast. Barrymore considers that it was unfair on our part to hound his brother-in-law when he himself had told us the secret. Sir Henry was quite unapologetic. "If you told us of your own free will, it would have been a different thing, Barrymore, but the man's a public danger. There are lonely houses scattered over the moor, and he's a fellow who'd stick at nothing. He'll break into no house, sir, I'll give you my word. In a few days the necessary arrangements will have been made, and he'll be on his way to South America. For God's sake, sir, I beg you not to tell the police he's still on the moor. It will only get my wife and me into trouble." The baronet looked at me. "What do you say, Watson?" I shrugged my shoulders. If he were safely out of the country, it would relieve the taxpayer of a burden. Sir Henry frowned. "Well, I guess we're aiding and abetting a felony, but I don't wish to cause any more heartbreak. All right, Barrymore." With a few broken words of gratitude, the man turned to go, but he hesitated and then came back. "You've been so kind to us, sir, that I should like to do the best I can for you in return. I found something out after the inquest which I've told to no one. I know why Sir Charles was at the gate that night. It was to meet a woman." The baronet rose to his feet. "And the woman's name?" "I can't give you the name, sir. Her initials were L.L. The morning he died, a letter arrived for Sir Charles. Usually there were a great many letters, for he was well known for his kind heart. Everyone who was in trouble turned to him. But that morning there was only this one. It was from Coombe Tracy. Well, I thought no more about it, but when my wife was cleaning out Sir Charles's study, she found the ashes of a burned letter in the back of the grate. The greater part of it was charred to pieces, but the postscript read, 'Please, please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter and be at the gate by 10 o'clock. Beneath it was signed the initials L.L. I can't understand, Barrymore, how you came to conceal this information. Well, sir, it was immediately after that our own trouble came to us, and to rake this up couldn't help our poor master. It's well to go carefully when there's a lady in the case." "You thought it might injure Sir Charles's reputation?" "Well, sir, I thought no good could come of it." When the butler had left us, I went at once to my room and drew up my report of the morning's conversation for Holmes. It was evident that he'd been very busy of late, for the notes which I had from Baker Street were few and short. And yet this new factor must surely arrest attention and renew his interest. I wish that he were here. October the 17th. All day today the rain poured down. I thought of the convict on the bleak, shelterless moor. God help those who wander into the great mire now. In the evening I put on my waterproof and walked far upon the sodden moor, full of dark imaginings. I found the black tor where I'd seen the solitary watcher, and from its craggy summit I looked out across the melancholy downs. The two thin towers of Baskerville Hall were the only signs of human life, save for those prehistoric huts which lay thickly on the slopes of the hills. As I walked back, I bumped into Dr. Mortimer, who has been very attentive to us. Hardly a day's passed that he's not called at the Hall. I asked if he knew of a woman whose initials are L.L. He thought a few minutes. Well, not locally, but there is a Laura Lyons in Coombe Tracy. Who is she? I asked. Franklin's daughter, from Laughter Hall. She married an artist named Lyons, who came sketching on the moor. He proved to be a blackguard and deserted her, though I understand the fault may not all have been on one side. Her father refused to have anything to do with her, because she'd married without his consent. Her story got about, and several people did something to enable her to earn a living. I understand Sir Charles was one. When I got back to the Hall, I went to find Barrymore, to discover if his brother-in-law had yet left the moor. Oh, I haven't seen him, sir, but the food's gone. Then he's probably still there. Barrymore shook his head. The other man might have taken it. I stared at him. You know there's another man, then? Well, Selden told me of him, sir, a week ago. He's in hiding too. At first, Selden thought he was the police, but soon he found he had some lay of his own among the old huts. A lad brings food to him from Coombe Tracy. I don't like it, Dr. Watson, I tell you straight. The following morning, I went to Coombe Tracy to find Laura Lyons. My first impression of her was one of extreme beauty. But then I noticed something subtly wrong with her face, some hardness, perhaps, which marred its perfect beauty. "I have the pleasure," said I, "of knowing your father." It was a clumsy introduction, and the lady made me feel it. "There's nothing in common between my father and me. I owe him nothing. If it weren't for the late Sir Charles Baskerville and some other kind hearts, I might have starved." "It was about the late Sir Charles Baskerville that I've come to see you. Did you correspond with him?" I asked. The lady looked at me with an angry gleam in her eyes. "What is the object of your question?" "To avoid a public scandal. It's better that I should ask in private than the matter should pass outside our control. Now, did you correspond with Sir Charles?" "I certainly wrote to him once or twice. He was very kind to me, and I wish to acknowledge his generosity." "Have you ever met him?" "He came to Coombe Tracy once or twice." "If you saw him so seldom, and wrote so seldom, how did he know enough about your affairs to be able to help you?" She met my question with the utmost readiness. "There were several gentlemen who knew my sad story and united to help me. One was Mr. Stapleton, a neighbour and intimate friend of Sir Charles. He was exceedingly kind, and it was through him that Sir Charles learned about my affairs." "Did you ever write to Sir Charles, asking him to meet you?" Mrs. Lyons flushed with anger again. "Certainly not." "Not on the very day of his death?" The flush faded in an instant, and a deathly face was before me. "I could even quote from your letter," I said. She recovered herself by a supreme effort. "I have no reason to be ashamed. I'd learned Sir Charles was going to London the next day and might be away for months. I believed that if I had an interview I could gain his help, so I asked him to meet me. But I never went." "Why did you not go?" "Because I received help in the interval from another source. I would have written to Sir Charles to explain if I hadn't read of his death in the paper the next morning." The woman's story hung coherently together, and all my questions were unable to shake it. And yet the more I thought of the lady's face and of her manner, the more I felt that something was being held back from me. For the moment I could proceed no further, but must turn back to that other clue, which was to be sought for among the stone huts on the moor. Luck had been against us again and again in this inquiry, but now at last, as I made my way home, it came to my aid. Mr. Frankland was standing, grey-whiskered, outside the gate of his garden. "Good day, Dr. Watson!" he cried with unwonted good humour.
You must come in and have a glass of wine and to congratulate me on my latest victory in court."
My feelings towards him were far from being friendly after I'd heard of his treatment of his daughter, but the opportunity was a good one.
"It's a great day for me. I've closed the wood where the Fernworthy folk used to picnic. These infernal people seem to think there are no rights of property, and that they can swarm wherever they like with their papers and their bottles. No doubt they'll burn me a Jew tonight. I told the police last time they did it, but the country constabulary is in a scandalous state, and it hasn't afforded me the protection to which I'm entitled. But they'll regret it. I could tell them what they're dying to know, but nothing would induce me to help them now."
I'd been casting around for an excuse to get away from his gossip, but now I was transfixed. "Some poaching case, no doubt," I said indifferently.
"Ha! More important than that. How about the convict on the moor?"
"You don't mean you've seen where he is?"
"No, not exactly, but I've seen the child who takes him his food."
Here was luck indeed. Barrymore had said that the unknown watcher was supplied by a boy. It was on his track, and not the convict's, that Frankland had stumbled. He hurried me upstairs to his telescope and pointed to the black tor. And as I looked, there on the moor was the very boy, toiling up the hill carrying a bundle on his shoulder. I took my leave as soon as I was able and followed in his tracks. The sun was already sinking when I reached the summit of the hill. Over the wide expanse there was no sound and no movement. But down below me was a circle of old stone huts, and in the middle of them was one which retained sufficient roof to act as a screen against the weather. This must be the burrow where the stranger lurked. A vague pathway among the boulders led to the dilapidated opening. Throwing aside my cigarette, I closed my hand on the butt of my revolver, and walking swiftly up to the door, I looked in. The place was empty, but there were ample signs that I hadn't come upon a false scent. Some blankets rolled in a waterproof lay upon a stone slab, and a litter of empty tins showed the place had been occupied for some time. Then I saw the small cloth bundle brought by the boy, and beneath it a sheet of paper. Roughly scrawled in pencil were the words, "Dr. Watson has gone to Coombe Tracy." For a minute I stood with the paper in my hands. It was I, then, and not Sir Henry, who was being dogged by this secret man. Possibly I'd taken no step since I'd been on the moor, which had not been observed. Always there was this feeling of an unseen force, a fine net drawn round us with infinite skill and delicacy. Was this man our enemy, or was he our guardian angel? I swore that I wouldn't leave the hut until I knew. Outside, the sun was sinking low, and the west was blazing with scarlet and gold. Its reflection was shot back in ruddy patches by the distant pools which lay amid the great Grimpen mire. There were the two towers of Baskerville Hall, and there a distant blur of smoke which marked the village of Grimpen. Between the two, behind the hill, was the house of the Stapletons. All was sweet and mellow and peaceful in the golden evening light, and yet as I looked at them, my soul shared none of the peace of nature, but quivered at the vagueness and the terror of that interview which every instant was bringing nearer. With tingling nerves, but a fixed purpose, I sat in the dark recess of the hut and waited for the coming of its tenant. Finally, from far away, came the sharp clink of a boot striking upon a stone. Then another, and another. I shrank back into the corner and cocked the pistol in my pocket. A shadow fell across the opening of the hut.
"It's a lovely evening, my dear Watson,"
said a well-known voice.
"I really think you'll be more comfortable outside than in."
Hugh Laurie has been reading The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The programme was abridged and produced for Radio 2 by Jane Marshall Productions.